What it do? It's your boy Andre Spruell, and you are tuning in to the Middle of the Fence podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, whether you're listening, watching, or both. As I like to say, time is the most valuable thing on this earth because we can spend it but can't make it back. So as always, thank you for your time. And today's episode is titled Balancing Two Worlds, and we are going to look at the historical aspect of the tough terrain and Affluent Acres side and shaping it into what it is today, and just dig a little deeper into personal stories and experiences as a result. So again, today we are talking about how history and environment shaped the kids caught in the middle like myself. And to really understand what the balance feels like, you have to start with the history of both sides. So start the history on the Affluent Acres side of things. So the overarching historical situations or events that shaped it into what we know it as today as the suburbs are the origins after World War II, white flight, highways, and then obviously we know that there's better schools and resources on that side of the fence. So the following is from Kenneth T. Jackson's Crabgrass Frontier, a seminal history of U.S. suburbanization that explores post-World War II developments, including cheap land, new transportation, like highways, construction techniques, and a substantial federal subsidies for suburban housing that fueled the creation and growth of the American suburb. So that is a direct explanation of what set the foundation of the suburb in the first place. So it was an area where there was land available and it was set up for you to succeed in those types of suburban way of living. And to further add on to that, this is from Leah Platt Booston's White Flight Empirical Study. And this involved using data from 1940 to 1970, where Booston quantitatively demonstrates that increasing black immigration to cities prompted white families to move to suburbs, a clear case of white flight rather than just economic decentralization. And that's what the term white flight means when I mentioned it earlier. And I can directly relate to that because in the town that I grew up, Orange, New Jersey, shout out to Big O, currently in the stages of gentrification because it's a 30-minute train ride outside of New York City, and that's what tends to happen is when towns or areas get gentrified, it's because often it's due to prime location and again prime opportunities with cheap land and cheap housing, and over time it grows in value. So what happened was in Orange, New Jersey, there was a large Italian population, and in Orange there still to this day is a very small section that's like 2 or 3 blocks that still hold on to the Italian heritage. But I'm not sure when exactly, but I do know that around the 1980s, 1990s was when white flight started happening in Orange, New Jersey, because you saw more blacks and Hispanics moving into the neighborhood, primarily blacks and then over time Hispanics as well, which led to the white flight. And then it led to white people that lived in the area starting to move to neighboring towns that were 10, 15, 20 minutes away, and then starting their own suburban lifestyle. So that's a real life example of the white flight, and then just what led to the early stages of the suburban lifestyle and how we know it today. Again, it was set up for you to succeed over there. And over time, it grows into what we know it as today. And then transitioning to the tough terrain side, where it's the complete opposite. So the overarching historical aspects that shape the hoods or ghettos into what it is today is the result of redlining, disinvestment, systemic racism, and higher police presence. And despite all that, there's community resilience despite the limited resources. So this is from a recent study. So a 2025 study in Chicago that connects historical redlining, ongoing discrimination in lending, and gun-related violence. Neighborhoods experiencing both historic and present disinvestment show significantly higher firearm homicide risk, highlighting how racialized structural inequities persist in violence exposure. And also, too, a 2025 analysis found that historically redlined neighborhoods suffer high exposure of nitrogen dioxide air pollution, which is connected to past housing policy, to contemporary environmental and health inequities, and particularly in major cities such as LA and Atlanta. So just touching on the tough terrain side of things when it comes to the historical aspect. So the way that I relate to that personally is through my day job. So I work in real estate as an operations and marketing back-end person for a real estate team. And sometimes I do have to go to some listings or properties just to help out as needed from time to time. And a lot of the transactions that we've had have been in suburban neighborhoods, like very affluent suburban neighborhoods, all the way to hood or ghetto environments or neighborhoods. And the redlining is basically, the nicest way to put redlining is, and that's the part of town you don't want to go to, just to simply put it. And because we looked at how the suburban way of living, how in its historical origin was made to set up for success, it's the complete opposite on the more urban way of living, where it literally is set up for you not to succeed. It's the complete opposite. Again, the redlining, there is discrimination in lending, increased police presence, and all those factors contribute to an environment that lacks resources and makes it not as safe. And in turn, it leads to more violence, because when you don't have access to the same resources and you have to survive and make do with what you got, you are willing to resort to actions that may otherwise not be moral. And doesn't mean that I condone the violence that happens on the tough terrain side, because again, violence happens every day all throughout the world, whether we like to think so or not. But you can't ignore that the historical aspects that contributed to the suburban way of living and to the urban way of living. And kids who straddle both worlds experience both privilege and pressure. And that's the bigger picture. But let me bring it down to the everyday experiences that really made the difference. So just growing up, going to school, it was like getting in the car, driving past a bunch of homes that were right next to each other, which barely had yard space, seeing graffiti on the walls and crackheads walking on the street, and, you know, just everything that comes about with growing up in the hood. And then we get on the highway, and then 15 minutes later, or sometimes 30 minutes later, when it was the high school time, you are driving through these streets that are immaculately paved, and the white picket fence, and big ass homes, some of the nicest, most manicured lawns you ever seen, and you just feel the difference. So it literally, the contrast was seen every single day, Monday through Friday, and on weekends when there were social events going back and forth. And some of the things that contributed to the day of living that I haven't covered previously. One is social codes. So switching between I'm not getting played, which is learn on the tough terrain side, and then not getting judged, which was more learned on the Affluent Acres side. So what it means is that growing up in a more urban environment, the don't get played is basically like I'm not going to be taken as a fool or a sucker. Like, I'm not weak. I'm going to show you that I'm strong, I have some grit to me, and that I'm not a pushover. And then you contrast that with the social code learn on the suburban way of living of don't get judged. Because, again, because of what comes with that world, people are very quick to judge others. And not just in that world, but in our world in general. And so the mindset there was just more so of one of just making sure that I presented myself in a way that's true to myself, while also not trying to stick out like a sore thumb aside from my exterior looks, while being on a more suburban way of living. And another aspect is the space and access. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that the facilities and parks on the Affluent Acres side is just a lot more nicer and up to date. And on the tough terrain side, it's way more just outdated and needs some fixing, to say the least. And I feel like a great example that I can think of is when you go to a local town hall, right? Go to if you haven't done this, you will see the difference. If you go to a town hall and a more of an affluent background versus going to a town hall where it's a town that has more of a ghetto type of vibe to it, it's night and day, right? So for example, the Affluent Acres town hall floors are nice and clean. Everything is new, and it's just you can just feel the difference. And then when you go to the town hall in a urban type of city, you see floors that are peeling and cracking, bathrooms that are outdated and have color schemes from the 1970s because they don't have it in their budget to update or renovate it, and just how they process their systems and the systems that they use are usually a lot more outdated compared to the systems used in the town halls on the Affluent Acres side. So if you ever want to see like the direct contrast, I challenge you guys to do something like that. And then obviously the friendship bonds that were created across both cultures. And this is the one that I value the most, because it just goes to show that regardless of what side of the fence that you grew up on, there's people that grew up similar to you because of how they were raised and that have similar values. And the friendships was a great way to cross both worlds together and make you realize that, oh, wow, you grew up totally different than me. You look totally different than me. You dress totally differently than me. You act much differently than me. But we can coexist and, really see the world and life for what it is. And there's been multiple instances where I've been on the Affluent Acres side and have had friends stick up for me, just wherever there was a situation where there was low-key some racism or me just being singled out for no reason. And then vice versa, while growing up on the tough terrain side, it's what I admire most about my friends from the tough terrain side is them just being their authentic selves. And even if they are in a more suburban, affluent type of setting, that's not going to hold them back from being who they truly are, and encourage that from me as well. So, but what really shaped me wasn't just surviving those differences. It was the skills and mindset I build from walking that line every single day. So let's delve into the lessons and takeaways from this. So the biggest thing is you learned two languages, one of survival and and one of advancement. So that's a slightly fancier way of putting it as book smart and street smart. And again, people have their opinions on which one's better, but when you are book smart and street smart, you just know how to navigate the world better, and you don't need a bunch of scientific data to realize that, because you just notice it and feel it from someone that carries that type of energy to them. And adaptability as a superpower, and this is the biggest takeaway from me personally, is again, when you see the contrast of the most upper echelon way of living compared to one of the lower forms of living and the struggle that comes with that, you're able to just adapt and get along better with people because you have a better understanding. And it's something where, like, the thing that I think of from the adaptability perspective is being able to be in an environment like a cookout in the hood where we're grilling some good ass food. We got the 90s throwbacks going, two-stepping and vibing and everything like that, to being in a suburban type of environment or gala, where it's like everyone is in like a suit or tux, and there's champagne and hors d'oeuvres that you've never even seen or heard of, So being able to adapt to be in such two different settings that contrast one another, and still being able to adapt and stay true to who you are, is an underrated skill. So that was another takeaway. And then the pressure and motivation. So obviously, just because it's a different way of living, you had classmates talking about ski trips while I experienced having lights and electricity cut off, because of prioritizing paying other things like tuition and the mortgage, because again, you had to survive. And stuff like that didn't frustrate me all the time, because again, it just what came with the way of living. But it was something like that is used as a source of fuel, where it's like, okay, even as a kid, like, I realized whenever I get older and I have my own family, I don't want my kids having to ask me about, money and wondering, oh, are they going to ever come back and turn the lights off? I want them to be able to, talk about things like being able to go on ski trips and live the best life. And let me not get too far off this train track over here. But so those are some of the major lessons and takeaways. And when I look back now, I realized that those lessons weren't just childhood survival tactics. They became blueprints for how I navigate life as an adult. And as we begin to wrap this up here, growing up between the hood and the suburbs taught me perspective, discipline, and gratitude, but also carry challenges people don't always see, which is at the basis and primary purpose of this podcast and what it's about. And there's a question that I want to pose to the listeners. It's, if you grew up navigating two worlds, or just have had any kind of experience navigating two worlds, what lessons did you carry with you? I'm sure a lot of them are similar to mine, but just very interested and curious into what you guys have to say. So again, in today's episode, we looked at the historical context into what shaped the suburban and urban way of living into what we know it as today. We also looked at daily life and then the major takeaways that came about from it. So if you like this episode, please be sure to leave a comment, rating, and share it so we can continue growing organically. And Again, just like I always leave as a takeaway for you guys at the end of every episode. No matter which side of the fence you grew up on, we're all more alike than we think. My name is Andre Spruell. Catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. And if you like this episode, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube and hit the little notification bell so you can be the first to be notified when the latest episode drops. Also, be sure to check us out on your favorite podcast streaming platform as well, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And again, no matter what side of the fence you grew up on, we're all more alike than we think.